My name is Tessa Whitmore. I am 38 years old. 21 years ago, my parents threw me out of the house because I was pregnant at 17. That night, it was raining. A suitcase sat at my feet. My mother stood in the doorway with her arm pointing outside as if she were driving away a stranger. She said that from that moment on, I was no longer their daughter. My father did not yell. He did not need to. The next morning, he signed the legal papers removing my name from the Whitmore family. No inheritance, no responsibility, not even an acknowledgement that I had ever existed. They told everyone in Savannah that I had gone abroad, that I had chosen to leave to pursue my own life. In their version of the story, the Whitmore family remained perfect, moral, and respected. I kept every one of those documents for 21 years. Last week, they showed up at the front door of my house in Charlotte. The two of them stood there with polite smiles and gentle voices, as if we had only been apart for a few months. They came to meet their grandson, the grandson they had been bragging about to their friends, to their church, and to the powerful people in the city. There was only one problem. There was no grandson. And the truth waiting for them inside that house was about to shatter the perfect story they had built for more than 20 years. Savannah, Georgia, the year 2003. I was 17 then, a junior at St. Agnes Preparatory, and the youngest child of Charles Whitmore and Evelyn Whitmore. On paper, my family was the perfect image of this old Southern city. My father was a senior partner at a long-established private bank, the Whitmore name engraved on the brass plaque outside the marble building on Broughton Street. My mother ran the Whitmore Foundation Scholarship Fund and had led the Women's Committee at Grace Chapel for years. Every Sunday morning we sat in the front row, our clothes prepared the night before, our hair neat, our smiles exactly as they were supposed to be. From the outside, we were the family everyone wished they could become. But every family has an invisible order, and I learned my place in it very early. Gavin, my brother, was 6 years older than me. He studied business at Duke University and was seen as the one who would inherit the Whitmore legacy. Whenever Gavin came home, my father spoke to him like a future partner, discussing investments, stocks, and banking strategy. Lorraine, my sister, was 4 years older than me, beautiful, graceful, and always knew exactly what to say to make my mother proud. She studied nonprofit management and often accompanied my mother to fundraising galas. And then there was me, the late-born child. The surprise my mother had never truly accepted. The signs were never obvious, but they were always there. The Whitmore living room was filled with family photographs, Gavin in his graduation robe, Lorraine in her formal gowns, my parents standing beside politicians and donors. My pictures were there too, but usually pushed to the edge of the shelf. Smaller, easier to overlook. Dinner in our house felt like a board meeting. My father asked Gavin about his summer internship plans. My mother asked Lorraine about the upcoming charity gala. When I mentioned that my essay had just won a statewide writing competition, my father simply nodded and said, "Good job, Tessa," then turned back to Gavin. I learned to speak less, to take up less space, to make myself small inside my own home. My father had a sentence he repeated at nearly every family gathering: reputation takes a lifetime to build, but only a few minutes to destroy. At the time, I did not understand what he meant. I also did not know that one day I would become those very minutes he feared the most. I met Adrian Cole in a small bookstore near the Savannah riverfront. It sounds ordinary, but to me that place felt like a shelter. No one there knew I was a Whitmore. No one compared me to Gavin. No one looked at me like I was a flaw in my mother's perfect plan. Adrian worked part-time at his uncle's boat repair yard. He was 18, his hands always stained with engine oil, his brown hair usually messy from the wind off the river. But his eyes were kind. The first time we spoke, I was crying between two tall shelves of history books. My mother had forgotten to pick me up after school again, the third time that month. Adrian sat down across from me and asked a very simple question: "Are you okay?" No one had asked me that in a very long time. After that, we started seeing each other more often: quiet afternoons in the bookstore, long walks along the river, conversations where I did not have to pretend to be someone else. Adrian was not impressed by the Whitmore name. He simply looked at me as a person. For me, that feeling was like breathing after holding my breath too long. We dated in secret for almost 3 months. One morning in November, I stood inside the bathroom of an old bus station on the edge of the city. In my hand was a pregnancy test, 2 pink lines. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it on the floor. When I told Adrian, he did not run. He held my hands and said we would figure it out, that I was not alone. I wanted to believe him. Part of me truly did. But I also knew my parents. I knew the first thing they would think would not be whether I was okay, but what people would say. I decided to tell them at Sunday dinner. I did not know it would be my last meal in that house. Sunday, 7 in the evening. The dining table was set the same way it was every week. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, my father's glass of wine placed in its usual spot. My father was talking about a new banking deal. My mother was calculating the guest list for the winter fundraiser. I looked down at my plate and tried to gather enough courage. Finally, I said, "I have something to tell you." 4 people looked up: my parents, Gavin, who was home for the weekend, and Lorraine visiting from college. I told them I was pregnant. The fork slipped from my mother's hand and hit the table. My father did not move. He asked only one question: "Who is the father?" I said Adrian's name. I said he worked at a boatyard. I said he was a good person. The silence lasted 11 seconds. I remember because I counted. Then my father stood up. He said I would not keep that baby. He said I would not destroy everything the Whitmore family had built. I said I was going to have the child. And that was it. At 9:15 that night, I was standing on the front porch in the cold November rain. A suitcase sat beside my feet. My mother opened the door and pointed outside. Not my father. My mother. From the upstairs window, I saw Gavin and Lorraine looking down. No one came down the stairs. I called Adrian from an old payphone at a gas station a few blocks from my house. My hands were shaking so badly I had to dial the number twice. He picked up on the second ring. "Tessa, what happened?" "They threw me out." 20 minutes later, his uncle's old pickup truck rushed into the parking lot like a gust of wind. Adrian jumped out before the truck even stopped. He took off his jacket, draped it over my shoulders, and pulled me into a tight embrace. He did not ask what I had done wrong. He did not ask if I was sure I wanted to keep the baby. He said only one thing: "I'm here." That night, we knocked on the door of Helen Navarro. She lived 3 houses down from the Whitmore home, 63 years old, a retired high school teacher, the only person in the neighborhood who never bowed her head around my father. Helen said she had seen me standing on the porch in the rain. She opened the door and told me I could stay as long as I needed. 2 weeks later, Adrian found a tiny room in Charlotte, North Carolina, a cramped apartment above an old shoe repair shop. The rent was cheap enough that the walls felt as thin as paper. 3 months later, my father sent me a certified envelope. Inside were legal papers. Grace Elizabeth Whitmore, the daughter they once had, was officially removed from all inheritance rights. The Whitmore family carried no legal or moral responsibility for me or for any dependents I might have. I kept that letter. I still keep it to this day. My daughter was born on a sweltering summer morning in Charlotte. I named her Ruby. Ruby had Adrian's brown eyes and my stubborn chin. When the nurse placed her in my arms for the first time, she screamed loudly. I remember thinking, "Good, scream as loud as you can. Never let anyone make you feel like you have to be small." The first few years were a whirlwind of survival. Adrian worked almost all day at the mechanical shop. I studied in evening classes to earn my high school equivalency. During the day, I took any work I could find. I cleaned stores. I painted signboards. I helped decorate window displays for small shops. We ate instant noodles more often than proper meals. Some months we counted every coin just to buy milk for Ruby. But we still laughed. Adrian always said I had a special eye for design. He said I could look at an empty room and see a home. I started taking small projects, decorating cafes, rearranging living rooms for elderly couples, redesigning a small clothing shop in a shopping center. Some people paid me, some did not. Once a shop owner took my design and hired someone else to do it cheaper. I sat in the kitchen that night and told Adrian maybe I should quit. He only shook his head. "Tessa, you have something people cannot learn," he said. "You know how to turn a place into a home." So I kept going. Then one evening in March, a truck ran a red light on Freedom Drive. Adrian was driving home after a late shift. The police knocked on my apartment door close to midnight. I still remember the young officer standing there with his hat in his hands, his voice too gentle. He told me Adrian died at the scene. Adrian was 26 years old. Ruby was 4. The workplace insurance Adrian had only paid a small amount, not enough to change anyone's life. I was 24, a single mother with a 4-year-old child and no one to call. I could have collapsed right then. But I did not. I threw myself into work like someone swimming through a violent current. During the day I worked. At night I studied interior design at the community college. Many evenings I brought Ruby with me to class. She sat on the floor drawing while I learned how to measure light and combine colors. Years passed that way. Then at a small design workshop I met Judith Mercer. She had once been the creative director of a major hotel design company. She had retired and was looking for a new project. Judith studied my portfolio for a long time. Then she looked at me and said something I still remember. "You have not been trained the proper way, but you truly understand space. Let me help you turn that into a career." Judith became my mentor. Years later, I opened my own design firm in Charlotte. We started with a tiny rented room and an old wooden desk, one client at a time, one project at a time. I rebuilt my life from nothing. Not Whitmore, not Savannah, just me and Ruby, and we made it. 21 years. That was how long the Whitmore family had not spoken to me. Not a single phone call, not a birthday card, not one message asking if Ruby was doing well. They erased me from their lives the way someone erases a mistaken line from an accounting ledger. Until last week. That evening in Charlotte was quiet. I had just left the office after a long meeting with a major client. My company was redesigning the interior for a new boutique hotel chain, and my mind was still full of sketches, color palettes, and lighting plans. When I turned onto the small street in front of my house, I saw the car. A black Bentley, Georgia license plate. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I did not need to look closely to know who was standing in front of my door. 2 figures. A silver-haired man with slightly stooped shoulders, a woman standing straight, her hands folded neatly in front of her as if she were still attending a church fundraiser. Charles Whitmore, Evelyn Whitmore, my parents. I had not seen them in 21 years. I sat in the car for a long moment. Part of me wanted to turn the wheel and drive away, just head back to the main road, find a hotel, call Ruby, and tell her we would have dinner somewhere else tonight. But I was no longer the 17-year-old girl standing in the rain. I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car. My father saw me first. "Tessa." He said my name as if he had just remembered an old word. His eyes moved from my coat to my handbag, then toward the house behind me. "You look quite well." That was his way of admitting I had succeeded without Whitmore. I folded my arms. "What are you doing here?" My mother stepped forward. Her face looked older, thin lines around her eyes, but the way she spoke was exactly the same as 21 years ago, calm, controlled, not a trace of awkwardness. "We need to talk, Tessa." I did not invite them in, but they stepped through the door anyway. My father walked slowly around the living room, as if he were inspecting a house he might buy. His eyes paused at the wooden floor, the bookshelves, the painting on the wall. My mother sat down on the sofa, her hands resting neatly on her knees. There were no questions about my life. No questions about Ruby. She began immediately. "We know you have a son." I looked at her. "I'm sorry. Your son," my father added. "We want to meet him." The room fell silent. 21 years without speaking to me, and now they had come for a grandchild. "Who told you I have a son?" My father waved his hand. "The article. The article about your design company. It said you have a child." My mother nodded. "We have heard many good things. You have a career. You run a company. That is very pleasing." I almost laughed. 21 years ago, she said I had shamed the family. Now she said I was pleasing. My father placed his leather briefcase on the table. "We have an important event. Our 45-year wedding anniversary, a charity gala. 200 guests. The mayor, the bank's board, the scholarship foundation, the pastors from Grace Chapel." My mother continued. "The entire community will be there." I looked at them. "What does that have to do with me?" My father looked directly into my eyes. "People have begun asking about you. They remember the Whitmore family had 3 children. And they ask, 'Where is Tessa? What happened to her?'" "We told them you went abroad," my mother said, "but the questions are increasing." "I see. You need me to appear." My father nodded. "And your son?" The room fell silent again. "We have told everyone we have a grandson," my mother said, as if she were mentioning a minor detail in the party planning. "A smart boy," my father added. "A new Whitmore." I looked at them. "You invented a person." My mother frowned slightly. "We simply simplified the story." My father opened the briefcase and placed a check on the table, a compensation for the inconvenience. I looked at the number written on the paper, a large amount of money. My father said, "You only need to attend the party. Bring your son. Stay for a few hours. Take a few family photographs. Then you may return to your life." My mother leaned forward. "If you agree, we can also restore your position in the family foundation." 3 siblings sharing equally. The Whitmore estate is not small. I remembered the apartment above the shoe repair shop. I remembered the nights counting coins to buy milk for Ruby. I remembered the crib beside my desk while I drew my first design plans. And now they believed I could be bought. "If you refuse," my father said, "we can still find a way to contact your son. Explain the family history to him." It was not an offer. It was a threat. I was about to answer when footsteps sounded on the staircase. "Mom." Ruby stood on the last step. She was 20 years old, a second-year psychology student, wearing an oversized hoodie, her hair tied up, a thick book still in her hand as if she had just left her desk a few minutes earlier. She looked at the 2 strangers in the living room. "What is going on?" My mother stood up abruptly. She stared at Ruby for a long moment. "Who is this?" I walked to my daughter's side. "This is Ruby. My daughter. Your granddaughter." My father blinked. "Daughter. But the article said I have a child. It never said boy or girl." Ruby looked at them calmly. "You are the grandparents who threw my mother out when she was 17, right?" My mother said immediately, "That situation was far more complicated." Ruby crossed her arms. "Complicated how?" "Complicated because you forced a 17-year-old girl out into the rain, or because you pretended she did not exist for 21 years. My father tried to regain control. "Young lady, Ruby interrupted him. Granddaughter. I am your granddaughter. 20 years old, and I have known the whole story for a long time. The room fell quiet. Ruby turned to me. They came here for a grandson, right? I nodded. She looked back at them. Sorry to disappoint you. My father inhaled slowly. I could see his lawyer's mind calculating. A granddaughter, he said slowly. We can adjust the story. Ruby laughed, without a trace of humor. What do you mean? My mother spoke quickly. We can say you studied abroad and just returned. Ruby shook her head. I was born in Charlotte. I will not lie for you. My father looked at his watch. The gala is next week. We need an answer before the weekend. I stood up. You should leave. My mother picked up her handbag. At the door, she turned back. This is an opportunity to repair the family, Tessa. Do not let the past destroy your future. I opened the door. You already destroyed my past. I will not let you destroy my present. They stepped outside. The Bentley rolled away down the street. Ruby looked at me. Mom, you are not actually considering that, right? I looked at her. The girl my parents tried to erase from the world before she was even born. No, I said, but I am not finished with them yet. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you were me, standing at that door after 21 years of being erased from your family's life, what would you do? Would you take the money and stay silent? Or would you walk into that gala and tell the truth? Write your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to know what happened next, subscribe, because what came after that went far beyond anything I ever imagined. That night, after Ruby went upstairs, I did not go to bed. I stood for a long time in my bedroom, looking through the window at the dark garden behind the house. A light wind moved through the maple trees, the leaves brushing softly together like whispers. But inside my head, there was nothing quiet. 21 years ago, my parents closed the door behind me and said I was no longer a Whitmore. They did it without hesitation, without doubt, without even a trace of mercy. And now, they were back. Not to apologize, not to make things right. They came back because they needed a story. I walked to the closet. At the back of the top shelf was a small metal box. That box had followed me for years, through 3 different apartments, through the days when I barely had enough money to pay rent, even through the years after my company began to succeed. I pulled the box down and set it on the bed. I unlocked it. Inside were things I had never thrown away. A certified envelope, a notarized copy, 2 documents signed in dark blue ink. My name was printed on the first line, Grace Elizabeth Whitmore. I had not used that name for many years, but on that paper it was still there, like a trace of a life that once existed. The date was November 2003. Beneath it were 2 familiar signatures, Charles Whitmore and Evelyn Whitmore. I read again the paragraph I had read hundreds of times before. Grace Elizabeth Whitmore voluntarily relinquishes all inheritance rights. The Whitmore family holds no legal or moral responsibility for the individual named above or for any of her dependents. Dependents. That word always made me stop. Ruby, my daughter, had been erased from the family before she was even born. I took out my phone, photographed every page, saved them to cloud storage, then emailed copies to myself. I no longer believed in keeping anything important in only one place. When I looked up, Ruby was standing in the doorway. She leaned against the frame with her arms crossed, looking at the box on the bed. Mom, I guess those are the papers, right? I nodded. Ruby walked into the room and sat beside me. She picked up the first document and read slowly. When she reached the line about dependents, her hand tightened on the edge of the paper. They actually wrote this. Her voice became quieter. I nodded. That was how they made sure no one could ever force them to take responsibility for us. Ruby set the paper down. She was silent for a long time. Then she spoke. Mom, what are you going to do? I looked at the documents spread across the bed. I do not know yet, but there is one thing I am certain about. They will not be able to keep pretending anymore. Ruby lifted her head. You want to go to that party? I did not answer immediately, but my eyes gave the answer anyway. Ruby nodded slowly. If you do that, we need to prepare. The next morning, I made a phone call I had not made in a very long time. Helen Navarro answered on the third ring. Hello, Helen? There was a short silence. Then she said my name. Tessa. I smiled even though she could not see me. Yes, it is me. She laughed softly. My God, how long has it been? Her voice sounded exactly the same as before, warm, direct, without a trace of pretense. What happened, child? You have not called me in years. I told her everything. I told her about the Bentley outside my house. I told her about the imaginary grandson. I told her about the check my father placed on the table. Helen said nothing for a long moment. Finally, she sighed. 21 years, and they are still exactly the same. I took a slow breath. Helen, I need to ask you something. That night, the night they forced me out of the house, you remember it, right? Helen's voice became firmer. I remember every detail. I saw you standing under the porch. It was pouring rain. The small blue suitcase beside your feet. I saw your parents close the door. I saw you standing out there for a long time. I closed my eyes. Do you still have the security camera footage from back then? Helen laughed quietly. You know me. I never delete anything. 20 minutes later, my phone vibrated. A new email. I opened it. A photograph. Not perfectly clear, but clear enough. A young girl standing under a porch in the rain, a small suitcase beside her. The timestamp glowed in the corner. 9:17 in the evening, November 2003. The address Whitmore Drive faintly visible at the edge of the frame. Helen called again a moment later. That is you, she said, the night they threw you out. I looked at the picture for a long time. For 21 years I thought no one had witnessed that moment. But someone had. Helen spoke again. If you need me to tell the truth in front of people, I will. After the call ended, I placed the photograph beside the legal letter. 2 pieces of the truth. But I still needed a plan. That evening, Ruby sat with me at the dining table, along with someone else, Judith Mercer. Judith had once been the creative director of a large hotel design company before retiring. She was the first person who looked at my messy portfolio years ago and said I truly had talent. Judith slowly turned the glass of wine in her hand. They want a performance, she said. A perfect family. A perfect story. Ruby spoke immediately. They want to use Mom. Judith nodded. Exactly. They need you to appear, smile, take photographs, confirm the version of the story they created. I placed my phone on the table. I am going to that party. Ruby immediately looked at me. Mom. Not to follow their script, I said, but to tell the truth. Judith studied me for a long moment. You are planning to do that in front of everyone. I nodded. 200 guests, cameras, every person they have lied to for 21 years. Ruby spoke again. I am going with you. I looked at her. Ruby, you do not have to do that. She shook her head. I do. I have spent 20 years knowing my grandparents did not want me to exist. If they want to see the next generation of Whitmore, then they will see me. Later that night, I received another call. The number came from Georgia. I almost did not answer, but in the end I did. Tessa. It was Gavin, my brother. His voice sounded heavy. I know I do not have the right to call, but I need to tell you something. I said nothing. Gavin sighed. The grandson story started with Mom. She read an article about you a few years ago. The article only said you had a child. She imagined a grandson and started telling that story to friends, to the church, to donors of the foundation. Over time, the story kept growing. Dad never corrected it. Gavin paused. Tessa, I am sorry. 21 years ago, I stood on the staircase and watched you in the rain, but I did not come down. I closed my eyes. Gavin continued. The gala next week will be live-streamed. Part of it will be broadcast to the church community. The cameras will show the family moment. I sat upright. Live stream. Yes, he said. If you come, everyone will see. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time. A party. 200 guests. Cameras broadcasting live. A false story. And a truth buried for 21 years. I turned to Ruby. She was already watching me. We are going, I said. But this time, the story will not belong to them anymore. The night of the gala arrived faster than I expected. Savannah looked exactly the way it had 21 years ago. The cobblestone streets, the ancient oak trees draped in gray moss like curtains of time, the old white houses with their curved iron balconies. The only thing that was no longer the same was me. Our car pulled up in front of the Riverfront Hall, a large pale stone hotel where the city's charity events were usually held. Outside, the golden lights glowed brightly. Luxury cars lined up at the entrance. Valets opened doors for guests in tuxedos and evening gowns. Ruby turned off the engine and looked at me. Mom, are you still sure about this? I looked at the building in front of us. 21 years ago, I left Savannah with a small suitcase and an unborn child. Tonight, I was coming back with a completely different life. I nodded. I'm sure. Ruby stepped out first. She was wearing a simple black dress, her hair pulled low, no elaborate jewelry. But she walked with quiet confidence. We entered the lobby. Soft music floated through the room from a jazz band in the corner. Round tables were covered in white linen. White orchids stood in the center of each one. Around 200 people were standing together, holding champagne glasses, smiling and talking as if the world had never been complicated. And at the center of the room were my parents. Charles Whitmore in a black tuxedo. Evelyn Whitmore in a silver silk gown. They were smiling, shaking hands, embracing guests, exactly like the photographs they had always wanted the world to see. A perfect family. As soon as we walked in, a few people began to look. A few curious glances. A few whispers. I knew what they were wondering. Is that Tessa Whitmore? Ruby tilted her head toward me. Mom, they're looking. I spoke softly. Let them look. We walked deeper into the room. My father saw me first. He was speaking to a man in a gray suit, and when his eyes landed on me, his sentence stopped in the middle. He froze. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then he smiled. The same smile he always used at fundraisers. Tessa. He started walking toward me. I did not move. Evelyn turned when she heard my name. She looked at Ruby, then back at me. I saw a flash of panic pass through her eyes. You came, she said, lowering her voice. We need to talk before... I cut her off. No. We're going to talk in front of everyone. My father placed a hand on my arm. Tessa, this is not the place. I looked around the room. This is exactly the place. Ruby stood beside me. She said nothing, but her eyes were sharp. At the far end of the room was a small stage with a podium. A large screen hung behind it. I saw 2 cameras. Gavin had not lied. A staff member was preparing the live stream. My father noticed where I was looking. He lowered his voice. Tessa, don't do this. I started walking toward the stage. He followed me. A few guests began to pay attention. The music stopped as the band took a break. The air in the room changed, slowed. I stepped onto the stage. One of the event coordinators looked at me in confusion. "Excuse me, you are—" I took the microphone. "My name is Tessa Whitmore." The room fell silent. I saw faces recognizing the name. A few people turned to look at my parents. Evelyn stepped forward. "Tessa, don't do this." I looked straight at her. 21 years ago you did this to me. Now it's my turn to speak." A few guests started whispering. I spoke into the microphone. "I know many people in this room. Some of you have known the Whitmore family your whole lives. Some of you have heard the story about the daughter who went abroad. Some of you have heard about their grandson." I paused. "But that story is not true." I took out my phone and opened the photograph Helen had sent me. The screen behind the stage lit up as I sent the image to the projection system. A photograph appeared. A young girl standing in the rain, a small suitcase beside her, the timestamp visible in the corner. Murmurs spread through the room. I said, "That was me, 17 years old, the night I was thrown out of my home." My mother stepped forward. "Tessa, this doesn't need to." I kept going. My parents told everyone I went abroad. But the truth is, they shut the door and left me standing outside in the rain. 21 years ago. A woman at the back of the room raised her hand. It was Helen Navarro. I saw her standing beside one of the tables. Helen called out loudly. "I was their neighbor. I saw everything that night. I took her into my house after they left." The room grew louder. My father stepped onto the stage. He was trying to stay calm. "This is a family misunderstanding. There is no need." I held up a sheet of paper, a copy. I projected it onto the screen. The notarized letter. My name at the top. My parents' signatures at the bottom. Grace Elizabeth Whitmore relinquishes all inheritance rights. The Whitmore family bears no responsibility for her or for any dependents. The murmuring grew louder. Ruby stepped onto the stage beside me. She took the second microphone. "Hello, my name is Ruby. I am the granddaughter of Charles and Evelyn Whitmore. I am 20 years old. And these two people had never met me until last week." The room went completely silent. Ruby continued. "Because when my mother was 17 and pregnant with me, they chose their reputation over their own daughter." Evelyn shook her head. "This is not the way." Ruby looked at her. "You had 21 years to talk to my mother. Now it's our turn." A guest at one of the tables near the stage stood up. "Charles," he said, "is this true?" My father did not answer. I looked at him. 21 years ago you said reputation takes a lifetime to build, but only minutes to destroy. I'm only showing everyone the truth." Ruby placed a hand on my shoulder. I looked out at the room. 200 people. Cameras live streaming. The perfect Whitmore story breaking apart piece by piece. My father stood very still. Evelyn looked around the room as if she were searching for an escape. I spoke one final sentence. "I did not come here to apologize. I came here to make sure that no one in this room will ever hear a false story about me or my daughter again." Then I set the microphone down. Ruby and I stepped off the stage. We walked past my parents. They said nothing. No one tried to stop us. When we reached the doors, Ruby let out a long breath. "Mom, I think their party just ended." I looked back over my shoulder. The music had not started again. No one was laughing anymore. I said quietly, "No, this is only the beginning. If you think they deserved what happened tonight, hit the like button on this video. And keep watching, because what happened after that party changed more lives than I ever expected." We left the riverfront hall in silence. No one ran after us. No one called my name. No one tried to explain or stop us. The glass doors closed behind us, and the noise of the ballroom was cut off, as if someone had flipped a switch. Outside, the night air of Savannah felt cooler than I remembered. Ruby opened the car door and sat in the driver's seat, but she did not start the engine yet. Her hands rested on the steering wheel. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, Ruby turned to me. "Mom, I think tonight is going to change a lot of things." I looked through the windshield toward the hotel. Luxury cars were still arriving, and a few attendants were hurrying inside with confused expressions. I nodded. Yes, but I think those things needed to change a long time ago. Ruby started the car and we drove out of the parking lot. As the car turned off the street, I saw several people standing outside the hotel entrance, talking quickly to each other, their faces still stunned. The perfect Whitmore story had shattered, and every one of them had just witnessed it. We did not return to Charlotte that night. Ruby booked a room at a small hotel near the river. I sat on the edge of the bed and slipped off my heels, and for the first time in hours my body felt heavy, almost like stone. Ruby sat in a chair by the window scrolling through her phone. "Mom, I think you should see this." I looked at the screen. It was the live stream from the gala. Someone had already clipped the moment I stood on the stage, the moment the photograph appeared on the screen, the moment Ruby said, "My name is Ruby, the granddaughter of Charles and Evelyn Whitmore." The views were climbing every minute. The comments kept pouring in. Some people wrote that they could not believe it. Some said they had always suspected something. A few even said they remembered seeing me leave the Whitmore house that night years ago. Ruby scrolled down. "Mom, this video has already been shared thousands of times." I set the phone down. The story was out now. It no longer belonged to the Whitmore family. The next morning, when we went down to the hotel lobby, I could already feel the difference. Two women were standing near the coffee counter talking quietly. When I walked in, they looked at me. One of them gave a small nod. It was not curiosity, and it was not pity. It was a quiet nod of understanding. I nodded back. Ruby bought 2 coffees and we sat down at a table by the window. My phone vibrated. Gavin. I answered the call. He did not say hello. He just said, "You blew up Savannah last night." I said nothing. He sighed. The party ended early. Half the guests left before dessert was even served. The ones who stayed just stood there staring at Mom and Dad like they were strangers. I asked, "What about them?" Gavin was quiet for a moment. "Mom is at home. She hasn't come out of her room since they got back. Dad is calling everyone, trying to explain, but no one is really listening anymore." He paused. "Tessa, I'm sorry, not just about last night, but about 21 years ago." I looked out the hotel window. The morning sun was shining on the Savannah River. I said, "You weren't the one who threw me out of the house." Gavin spoke softly. "No, but I was the one standing on the staircase doing nothing." I did not respond. After a few seconds, he added, "For what it's worth, you did something no one in this family ever had the courage to do." I ended the call. Ruby looked at me. "Gavin." I nodded. She shrugged. "At least he called." In the days that followed, the story spread faster than I expected. A local newspaper published a short article about the gala. They did not say much about the Whitmore family, but they mentioned a video of a woman who stood up during a charity event and told the story of being cast out by her own family. My name appeared in the article, not as a secret, but as a fact. A week later, I returned to Charlotte. Life here continued as usual. My company still had projects to finish. Design plans still had to be sent to clients. But something had changed inside me. I no longer felt like I was running from the past. One afternoon while I was working in my office, Ruby walked in. "Mom, someone's calling for you." I picked up the phone. The number was from Georgia. I thought it would be my father, but when I answered, I heard my mother's voice. Evelyn Whitmore. Her voice did not sound the same as before. It was no longer cold or controlled, just tired. "Tessa." I did not speak. She continued. She said everything had gone too far, that people were talking, that her charity foundation was having problems, that several donors had already pulled their support. She paused, then said, "We need to talk." I looked out the office window and remembered the night of rain 21 years ago, the small suitcase, the door closing behind me. I said, "You had 21 years to talk to me." Silence filled the line. Then she asked, "What do you want now?" I thought for a few seconds before answering. "Nothing. I don't need an apology. I don't need money. I don't need the Whitmore family. I already have my own family." I looked across the room at Ruby sitting at the other desk, sketching a new design for one of our projects. And so does my daughter. I hung up the phone. Ruby looked up. "Was that my grandmother?" I nodded. She asked, "Do you feel lighter now?" I thought for a moment, then I said, "Yes, much lighter." That night we had dinner together. Not at a gala, not with 200 guests, not with cameras watching us, just the two of us. And for the first time in many years, I felt like the past was no longer standing behind me. It was behind me, and I was finally moving forward. There is one thing I learned after everything that happened. Family is not always the place you are born into. Sometimes, family is something you have to build from the ground up. 21 years ago, I stood under the Whitmore porch in the cold rain, holding a small suitcase and believing my life was over. I thought I had lost everything, my family, my future, even my identity. But I was wrong. Because that night was not the end. It was the beginning. I started again in a tiny apartment above a shoe repair shop. I started again with a baby in my arms and a world that had no Whitmore name in it. I built my life, piece by piece, one sketch, one client, one small opportunity at a time. And one day I realized I was no longer the girl left standing on the porch. I was the one who stood back up. I was the one who rebuilt everything. And most importantly, I was Ruby's mother. My daughter did not grow up in a perfect family, but she grew up in an honest one. She knows the truth. She knows her worth. And she knows that no one has the right to erase her from this world. If this story made you think, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want to hear more stories like this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Thank you for listening to my story.